Mr. Fitzgerald Ward, thank you very much for talking to our class today. And also just for the people who are going to watch this, graduate of class of 81, and then to Notre Dame, and eventually Harvard for your MBA. And that's three very prestigious schools. But first question I'd like
LaSalle
like
being the most prestigious, of course.
Absolutely,
of course.
Without a doubt. So, and in that vein, how did LaSalle High School, how did LaSalle College High School foster independence and prepare you to respond promptly, to adapt, and to make changes?
I think there's two experiences that I had when I was a student here that probably come to mind when I think of that question. One would be Brother Frank Danielski. When I was finishing my sophomore year, he taught AP European history here. And he asked me and two other students to take his class, actually insisted that we take the class, to push our capabilities and also to take us out of our mainstream with our classmates, because we wouldn't be taking class with juniors, we'd be taking class with seniors who we didn't know very well and were quite intimidated by. So we created a bit of independence, and then he challenged us through a great deal of grit to perform at something that I wasn't naturally good at. And so I did relatively poorly the first trimester, and then better, and then eventually did very well in his class. And so I'd say that's one example. And the other would be Brother Aloysius Lumley. Brother Al taught theology and religion here. And I think that, outside of the school, having the basis of religion and the basis of the Catholic faith certainly provides a bit of independence in a world where, of course, everyone's not Catholic. And so when you have that, both the support of and the independence of the faith, and I think it bolsters you to go on to do, to make changes and adapt and respond in the marketplace.
Well, when you talk about incorporating your faith as well as that idea of grit, obviously that's not always comfortable. So could you, what allows you to kind of push through, or, when Brother Danielski kind of challenged you? I'm sure this wasn't every day like, oh yes, brother, I'm just going to step it up. I'm sure there was a lot of hard work. And what made you step up to the challenge?
Well, I think that first there's a lot of, I'll call it reservation about jumping into the pool. But the one thing that I would say that, again, the LaSalle community gave me, I certainly would say too, that, my mother and father gave me, is the construct of you can't be afraid to fail. I think that's something that young people really need to understand today. Often young people, especially smart people that come to LaSalle High School, that they're expected to perform, they're accustomed to performing, and so they're not accustomed to not performing and failing. And so sometimes they're afraid to take risks in areas that they might hold reservation to get outside of their comfort zone. But I would say that LaSalle does give you the environment where they encourage you to take risks, to get outside of your comfort zone, and because there's a base and foundation of brothers and lay teachers and students, your friends, and actually their families that support you in your way to take risks and to get outside your comfort zone.
Somebody's looking for a job at your business, fresh out of college. What characteristics besides the academics, what are you looking for in that graduate?
Well, I'd say someone who's willing to work hard, first off. Unfortunately, in the workplace today, there's too many young people that have a great deal of entitlement in the United States today, different than 20 years ago when I first started hiring people. I've been in business for 30 years and started hiring people regularly probably 20 years ago. And people were more committed to their careers, more committed to making to production in their endeavors. Today, there's a little bit more reliance on the system by many individuals. So having the grit that I talked about, being willing to grind through a problem, solve a problem, be creative. I think someone who can think creatively and create solutions to problems is something that we would certainly look for. Someone that has values. I mean, obviously, things like integrity and honesty and transparency. The same thing I mentioned about not being afraid to make a mistake here. We say the same thing in the office. In order to make profits, you have to take risk. You can't be afraid to fail. Now, you have to learn how to mitigate those risks and when you take chances. But young people have to understand in our organization that they have to be confident enough to be accountable for what they do.
Could you have an example of a calculated risk that you took, did not work out, and what you learned from it?
I was about to take one that I took and it was successful, but no, I would say that probably a risk, that I would have been given sometime in the middle of my career was certainly to buy buildings or build buildings without any tenants, and they call it a speculative project. So there's risk. Speculation is risk, right? So there was a building actually not too far from here, up near in Horsham, Pennsylvania, that I was able to get the company to agree to spend the capital to buy this building, and with the idea that we would procure a company to start paying us rent and make money. In a very short period of time, it became clear that I wasn't very successful at procuring the tenant. And part of the reason why was because I wasn't willing to take enough risk and prepare the building and put enough capital into it to make it appealing. So corporations would come out to look at the building and they were unimpressed. We had done, I'll call it an ounce of work, but not a pound of work. And we were trying to, I'll call it cut corners a bit, or I was trying to cut corners, saying I don't need to spend much more money and I can still procure the tenant. And that did not work. And so that building sat vacant for almost 2 years before eventually I had to swallow the medicine, go back to our investment committee, asked for more capital. I got approved for the capital. We made all of the pound of improvements. Then eventually we let the building. Because of that, we didn't lose money on the building, but we had a 4% return when we should have had a 24% return.
Before you talked to our class today, we had a nice little private discussion about your faith life, your faithful practice of the Catholic faith, and as the society is getting more secular, and especially as you deal a lot with business in Europe, how do you incorporate that your Catholic faith into a professional business that is international?
I think there's some subtle ways and personal ways, and then of course I'll call them maybe a bit more evangelization. One is that of course I think that I say regularly that I don't really know in the secular world how people cope without believing and supporting and embracing a God, and embracing, at a minimum a God, and of course in my case and the boys here at LaSalle, Jesus Christ. I think that the idea that someone has the answers and they don't look to the heavens for the answers, whether it be in hope or in despair, to not share that with the heavens, because all of our gifts and all of our talents and all of our breath are a gift. And people who don't realize that, I think, have a great deal of hubris and not enough humility. And I would say that's also something that's really important when I interview young men and women, is I want to make sure that they have a certain amount of humility, because people that don't are often out for themselves and not out for a greater good, not out for the good of our clients, not out of the good for their coworkers. But I would say the faith gives me that attitude in business to be humble, to serve, to have a service leadership type of mentality. I think the way that it manifests itself, I'll call it outside my personal practice. And again, as I shared with you earlier, I am a daily communicant and go to adoration a lot, because I believe in staying that close to the source of hope and the source of light. I recommend it for every young person. But I will say that it depends on the audience, but there's many opportunities outside of Catholic organizations where I'll get an interview now that our business has been more prevalent around the world and more popular. And someone will interview me and they'll say, tell me about your day. And I'll say, I start by going to Catholic Mass. And you can't be shy about that. I think also it just happens that our logo is the monstrance with the Eucharist in it. So not everybody in the business knows what it is, but I get asked from time to time, what is that logo? And I'll say, well, you're not going to believe this, but that's the body of Christ. It's a representation. It's an icon of that. And so I think by having things like that, where you have a logo where someone could inquire, gives a vessel by which the inquiry leads to an opportunity of evangelization. And then sometimes I get to speak at Catholic colleges and I say, kids, go to Mass, and obviously they don't mind. And a lot of the people actually are quite encouraged by it.
Well, I know that the time is short, and I appreciate you taking the time first to address my class and Mr. McNamara's class, and then this interview. But if there's one final thought that you would leave with our LaSalle students, what would that be?
I think that it would be, in addition to staying humble when you leave here, is leave, as I have now, feel with a great deal of gratitude. Gratitude to the brothers, gratitude to St. John Baptist de LaSalle, gratitude to the lay people that have given their lives to educate them as young men, and carry that gratitude, obviously gratitude to the Lord, but the gratitude to those people that have served them, including their parents, in their journey. And if they hold that rootedness and the gratitude to all those parties, the heavens and the earth, that they'll do well.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you, buddy.